Or did America finally discover soccer? Either way, soccer is here in a big way. And it's here for good. The MLS on ESPN2.
And my goal, probably maybe my sophomore year in college, there was no, obviously we didn't know about MLS at the time, was to go to law school because my sister was finishing law school. Had family members who were lawyers, so it was like, oh, I'll go to law school. I was majoring in political science. It just seemed kind of like the normal path. If I chose not to do that, then the only way to play professionally at that time, at least at the level that I wanted to play at, would have been to go to Europe. And so I was kind of sitting on the fence at that point.
When I went to UVA, it didn't exist. And pro soccer, essentially in America, didn't exist at a level where it was on your brain. And I was involved in all the national teams, and I was going to the best university, or at that point, soccer program in the country. And it wasn't on my radar to be a professional soccer player at all. So that's how old I am, I guess you could put it. So it wasn't on my radar.
The goal for me growing up was to play at UCLA. Those are the games I went to as a kid. Those were the players that I idolized. That was the coach I wanted to play for, and Ziggy Schmid. That was it. I read about him in Soccer America. I would cut out all their articles. I would follow anything I could find in the newspaper, which about soccer was about this big in the sports page. And I loved it. And when I had that opportunity and I realized that dream and won a national championship at UCLA, that's my flex. It was it. I didn't need to accomplish anything else. I had done everything I'd set out to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I was growing up in St. Louis, there was no professional league. There was the indoor league when I was very young, but that started to go away. And so when I went to Indiana, the goal was to get a degree in business and to go do what my dad was doing and work in the business world.
As the years went in UVA after my second year, the leagues came to fruition, and then it became a possibility. But even then, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be a pro soccer player. So it was a real transitional moment, I think, for a lot of us that were in college, and it was. I'm glad it came about.
And then there was this announcement that, hey, Major League Soccer, professional soccer is coming to the United States.
The building blocks have been laid for the most ambitious coast-to-coast professional soccer league in American history.
And history is made today.
And then that's when I sort of started to consider this path of being a professional soccer player here in the U.S. It was something that was brand new. Not a lot of people outside of the world of soccer had any clue as to what it was. And the players, like, we weren't quite sure what it was coming out of college. We just knew there was a professional league and that we didn't necessarily have to pursue whatever we were majoring in at the time. We had the opportunity to be able to play the sport we loved for a living, and that was super exciting.
My junior year, MLS got started. And so you start thinking, well, what's that all about? Is that something that I want? But because UCLA produces a lot of national team players, there's a natural ambition there within the school that you should try to push and see how far you can go. And so I remember being at the senior banquet, we're talking, and I said, I guess I'll try to see if MLS works out. Now, I didn't get drafted, so I had to drop down into the lower leagues and work my way up. But yeah, MLS was never really on the radar in that type of way where I think kids can kind of have, MLS is now their UCLA, right? Where they can see it, they can live it, they can breathe it, and they can try to idolize those players.
I'll never forget when Major League Soccer started to take shape and going to watch the first game at a bar with some friends and just having this feeling of, oh, maybe we can do this as a career. And I was a sophomore in college then when it started to come in, and so it's starting to think of that as a possibility, but still have it be a little ways off. And we had some players that were drafted that went and played in Major League Soccer, and so that inflection point and having just this time where a real professional league in our country became a reality.
Towards the box, and the 6, it's headed home!
Yeah, I think for players, especially around my time, where we all were coming out of college, obviously there were some professionals coming back from Europe, some new ones coming from South America. So as college players, we weren't quite sure what to expect. We just knew that it would be hard. And so I think for me, I was kind of hoping, well, I'm at least trying to make the Olympic team. Olympics are coming up. I'll be able to play at that level. That's going to help me sort of transition into professional soccer. And then when I got there, it was just way too hard. Like it was way harder than I thought it was going to be. So I was even just trying to survive the practices, much less a game.
When you're young and you're thinking about being a professional athlete, you think about just playing soccer and living your life and, you know, I don't know, maybe having like some sort of fancy car or something like that. And the reality, of course, was much, much different, right? My initial contract, I'm very proud to say, was the base level contract, $24,500 in the city of Chicago. You know, I lived downtown. I had parking. I had an apartment. And, you know, my 24/5 did not go as far as I had hoped. So, you know, it felt a little sheepish, right? Like calling the parents, like, hey, you know, can you like help cover my parking this month? So those like stark reality setting in was something that I guess I wasn't prepared for.
I remember I was making $24,000, and I thought I was the richest man in town.
Bounces through the header. It's in the net. It's in the net. Middles it. Goal.
Yeah, it wasn't glamorous. We weren't doing charters, and then it was definitely the hotels and the travel budgets and things like that were different. But in that time, we didn't know any better.
So when you're making $24,000 in San Jose during the .com boom, it's hard to pay rent, and it's hard to get all the food that you need, and you're expected to play at a professional level, but you're not necessarily getting the means to match what's being expected. But you'd go out because you're a young guy and you want to socialize and you want to do these things. So we would walk into this bar, me and Joe Cannon and a couple of our teammates, and the bartender would be like, oh, the professional athletes are here. Drinks on those guys. And we're like, no. Not drinks on us, because we can't afford to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to pay our rent or any of that stuff. So it felt kind of weird that we go in there and just drink water at these bars because we couldn't pay for alcohol or any of the fun stuff that people our age were doing at that particular time. So there were these little funny things now for sure, but stuff that still felt a little embarrassing because we weren't necessarily being paid a fair wage, or at least what people perceived a professional athlete should be making at that time.
Yeah, I think in general, you know, obviously not a lot of money, not a lot of stability. And so when you take those two things, it's kind of, you know, an unfortunate situation for a lot of guys because you're so nervous just about getting terminated, getting injured, then getting terminated. And so it's just a lot of stress. You're living with a lot of people because you don't make a lot of money, and all of that, and you're trying to become a professional athlete and play at a really high level. And for a lot of, especially the young guys who were coming in, they were coming from college to that.
There was a real push about the professionalization of the sport from the player side, right? Which I always found, I guess, funny almost, in the sense that, you know, they were asking us to be more professional. You know, when you have means, you can be more professional.
Had an open shot. He played it to Donovan, and Donovan scores. It is tied again.
Then there's just this general feel of a lack of, I would say, professionalism in all ways, lack of legitimacy. First of all, our training situation at that time, I would drive to Spartan Stadium in San Jose. We had our trailers there that we dressed in before every match. We would get dressed for training, drive 30 minutes to West Valley College, I believe it was called. It was the only good field we could find, I guess. Train there, drive back to the stadium, shower, change, and drive home. So it was a long process. I didn't know any differently. It was my first time as a real pro in America. But the reality at that time is, yeah, you'd go out after a game and people were like, oh my God, you're a professional soccer player. Meanwhile, some guys were making $1,000 a month, right? And they were coaching on the side or driving an Uber. Well, Uber didn't exist at the time. Doing something like that just to make ends meet. And it was kind of hard to deal with because the perception was that they're famous and rich and making all this money, but the reality is not many people were watching or making a lot of money. It wasn't a glamorous lifestyle by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, it's 1,000% different compared to any other sport. And so the desire to want to be a part of the league at that particular juncture of the history of MLS was only about wanting to play and wanting to play in front of your friends and to be a part of something that was just getting started. I mean, I think we knew at that time that there was some history involved with what we were doing because it still felt unknown, or will this even last? We didn't really know for sure. And so you were just trying to ride the wave of, wow, isn't this cool? They're paying us to play soccer. We'd probably do it for free, but don't tell them, you know? So there was a little bit of that going on.
You know, as players, we were constantly bombarded with the messaging. Oh, hey, you know, the league is barely hanging on. You guys are lucky to have jobs. There was a lot of that messaging, whether it was explicit or implicit. Either way, the players, you know, knew that.
In the early days, it was the question of, are we going to open our doors again for next year? And that constant question that was sort of MLS 1.0.
Kind of heard rumors in 2001, middle of 2001, my first year in MLS, just in guys talking that the league was very seriously considering folding. That was a very real possibility. Our team, San Jose, was also very seriously considering folding. Owners were losing millions, if not tens of millions of dollars, and I believe that.
To be considered a professional, there are certain things that we all take for granted, right? 401k, direct deposit. One of the things that really, really irked me, and this probably says something about the level of ego that I had at that time in my life, probably to my detriment, was having to go to the downtown office, because we played in Lake Forest at Hallis Hall. I lived downtown, but to go up there and maybe on that payday, the team administrator was up there, or maybe he wasn't. And no one really being that concerned of where your check was, right? So there were many, many times that I was like hunting down our team administrator about where he was at in the city, so when I could get my check. And it was not uncommon to not get your check on payday, right? I would probably say it was more common to get it on some other day and like call that person and say, oh, well, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. I'll see you on Thursday. I was like, well, that doesn't work for me, right? So there was, and I've always been comfortable speaking my mind. I mean, I had definitely practiced the last 2 weeks. So I was expecting to be paid in a timely manner. So I suppose like those types of like everyday occurrences made me very receptive to the idea of unionization.
I remember where I used to get fired up is we had a player who got told by the coach that he was going to make the team. So he was thrilled, as he should be. He went and signed a 12-month lease and then found out 2 days later that actually we're not going to sign you. And then he had to break the lease and the club wouldn't pay for it. And these are just this. I would just lose my mind with these little things that you would hear, just the lack of respect for, let's leave the playing side out of it, just as another human being, that you would subject that person. And it was okay. There was no protection for that player. They could just do whatever they want. And I thought that was a bad look for that particular coach and that organization. But I think it helps propel me and give me the energy that we need to continue to fight these little battles, because there's a lot of players that he didn't want to say anything because he was embarrassed. He was ashamed. He just got cut after thought, so he's working through his own personal stuff, and there was nobody there for him when there should have been. And so you hear enough of those horror stories in different locker rooms, and it definitely mobilizes the group to, let's get after this and start to fix some of these issues.
It really was just talking to other players and starting to hear this idea that we didn't really agree with what was going on, but that we knew we needed to have a voice. And at that moment, it wasn't about leverage. It wasn't about making these huge gains as players, but it was just about having a voice to be able to speak to the league. And we really genuinely felt that the league wanted us to have that voice and wanted to engage with us. And so there was a group of players that got together that ultimately reached out to Bob Foose to say, hey, can you help, and would you be open to starting this?